climate change complicated issues of our society. So the questions are: do attitude toward climate change in turn influence other health behaviors? Do these impacts differ by socioeconomic status or location? And how can we foster this population's sense of agency and improve their self-efficacy? In order to answer these questions, we planned for co-design workshops with co-design activities that will support people to think about climate change and then come up with creative ideas. So we designed the plan, and then we were going to conduct this workshop with college students at Northeastern University and Roxbury Community College. And then right before we doing the workshop, COVID-19 happened. And then because of the lockdown, we had to cancel our plans. However, this actually became a new opportunity for our team because instead of the face-to-face co-design workshop, we decided to move to design probe that we are going to send to people's homes so that they can individually engage with. And then this is novel approach in public health research. So now Michael is going to introduce more detail about what we did.
Thanks, Miso. Yeah, so as you can imagine, pivoting quickly from a community-oriented workshop to a design probe, there were a lot of changes that needed to be made. But the one thing that we wanted to keep, kind of true to the originator of the probe technique is William Gaber at the Interaction Research Studio at Goldsmiths University in the UK. And one of kind of the original ideas of this is to facilitate some creative insight into difficult problems that face us. And so, we looked at that as a kind of key goal to this. So allowing people to write and draw in response to some of these difficult problems. You want to skip to the next slide. We're looking for a kind of contextual understanding of youth viewpoints, and we have the development of several critical questions around this. To what degree does awareness exist of climate change on a personal level? Do attitudes towards climate change influence other health behaviors? And what kind of actions and messaging might facilitate feelings of agency as pertains to climate? Next slide. So working from that standpoint, we looked at this set of attitudes, climate change concerns, and questions of agency. So for each of those, for the attitudes, a very traditional Likert scale, as well as the creative use of these carved stones. I guess I don't have on my camera. These carved stones that were used throughout the kit to prompt different responses. A color-coded pie chart, as well as postcards to people in power, drawing and mapping futures of climate. I'll turn it over to Estefania, who will take us through some of the findings from this project.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. So together with Sara, we're gonna go over some of the results. For the sake of time, we won't expand much in the methodology behind them, but you can feel free to ask questions afterwards. So like Michael was saying, one of the ways in which we tried to address attitudes towards climate change was through a Likert scale, in which we did research previously to try to come up with some prompts based on climate change hope, and try to understand how young adults were feeling towards this kind of prompt. We found that our participants strongly believe that climate change is currently happening and were motivated to and willing to take action. They believe they had some sort of agency in trying to addressing climate change. However, some of them were skeptical about how others may act or will act in regards to taking action to combat climate change. Yet, some of them also feel hopeful that even if some people give up, some will still continue to solve the issue. That was overall the analysis of this activity. And if we go to the next one, you'll see a little bit more the analysis of the next one. You'll see the analysis of the Carr stones. We call it carved. We actually laser printed some symbols in the stones. And we did some research prior to selecting the symbols. And we came up with symbols that addressed 4 categories that we found were really important in climate change. So health symbols, relationship symbols that had to do with network of people and feelings, natural symbols like fire, trees, dead fish, and then more man-made or technological symbols like plastic bottles, factories, $sign, and so on. So we laser printed this, like I was saying, in the stones, and then I'll go over some of the results and how we use them throughout the kit. So if we go to the next slide, we asked participants to choose in certain questions. We asked them to choose icons, like for example, how they mostly would represent this particular question, or how they felt, or what icon would represent better the kinds of feeling they were having and stuff like that. And we analyzed 2 frequencies, calculating which stone was selected the most for each question, and also the symbol that was most used overall, the whole kit. And so here you can see that the brain with the heart, for example, was the stone that, or the symbol that was used the most overall. We think that this seems to indicate that there is a strong relationship between mental health and physical health, are deeply intertwined in the analysis of our kids. The sad face was also commonly used, especially in the category of questions that were related to body, self, and feelings and emotions. As we will explain in the next slides too, the factory with the stacks, if you can go back, Miso, thank you. The factory with the stacks, as well as the dead fish and the $signs, were commonly used in relation to who they blame more about climate change. And then one really surprising issue or result that came out was that the happy face was never used throughout the kit, never, not once. So that was interesting finding too. The next activity was, we asked participants to tell us in the form of a pie chart what were their main concerns in regard to climate change. And we had a bunch of different responses. We asked them to color code and assign weight to the different concerns that they had. And then in order to analyze this, we combine all the responses from the individual charts, and then try to assign weights to all of them. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that after codifying and categorizing, we came up with 5 main categories of issues. Maybe it's gonna be easier to read in the next slide. Seems a little pixelated, but the main categories of issues that we codified out of this exercise was that young adults have main concerns in regards to direct health impact on health, like human physical health, and also climate anxiety, change in weather, and increase in natural disasters as a main category, impact on the ecosystem, including deforestation, including the extinction of wildlife, for example, direct impact on human conditions, including topics like migration, displacement, climate refugees, and so forth, and then the lack of resources overall. And with these 2 activities, we wanted to understand a little bit how participants felt in their sense of agency and action and motivation to act in climate change. So in the left or right, depending on how you're seeing it, we asked them to tell us, for example, who they hold responsible for climate change. and what was the action that they needed to do in order to address it or combat it. And so you'll see under the box, if you're looking at this, that the categories that came up the most as responsibles was government and large populations, for example. And among the actions that they needed to take were policy changes and direct requests for specific sustainable actions like decreasing consumption, moving away from fossil fuels and switch to renewable energies, cut down waste, stop advertising, among other answers. And on the right, we asked them to please express themselves by sending or writing a fake postcard to someone they think they could do something about climate change. This was really interesting too, to see that there was a wide variety of responses and who people were sending these postcards to. These ideal postcards were sent to from family members, friends, to politicians with name and last names, and other famous people too in some cases. Yeah, and then another activity that we really liked was we asked participants to draw themselves in 20 years from now, how they saw themselves in the future and in regards to their space and where they were and how they envision things will be in 20 years from now. We identify from all the drawings 4 categories of elements that they use in their drawings. For example, natural elements, a lot of them use trees, plants, mountains, the sun, ocean, other people, etc. Man-made elements like houses, large buildings, roads, cars, bikes. Drawings in general suggest that respondents were hopeful about the future, but also some of them addressed that they needed to do something. Like you can see in this one, for example, they had a combination of written text within that to explain that, you know, if we do something now, we will have this result. If we don't, then the opposite image. So that was also kind of interesting. And then some picture negative outcomes was, again, related to other responses and the symbols, dead fish, fires, increased in rain, and other negative conditions in the environment. Yeah, and then this is another example of the different drawings that we got. Some used colors, some didn't, some were more elaborated than others. Of course, like one thing that maybe a potential future opportunity for research would be interviewing these participants and understanding, you know, what was behind of this. So as you can see too, the main areas of concern are represented in the drawings, as we explained before. Changing weather, increased natural disasters, impact on the ecosystem, lack of resources, were represented here in these drawings. And I'll go over briefly some of the results of the journaling exercises, which included selecting some of the symbols of the stones that explain or express or link better to participants were feeling and thinking about climate change. We made a distinction between mental health and mental illness, and we tried to decodify the different emotions that we based in our research. We use the term eco-emotions, and so we tried to understand what participants were saying in regards to climate change. We identify emotions and feelings like pessimism and sadness, frustration and anger, disturb, disgust, contempt, guilt, fear, shame, but also hope, then also hopelessness, helplessness, and also in the positive side, peace and tranquility in some of the answers that they express. Some express specifically mental illness like anxiety, stress, depression in regards to certain prompts and questions. But the interesting thing too here is we try to identify also some coping mechanisms and ways in which they were addressing these kinds of negative impacts. And then if we go to the next one. Yeah, and then if we go to the next one, so the themes were codified and clustered. And if we go to the last one, we'll see the image better. But so we went over 3 rounds of coding exercises to try to reduce subjectivity in the codes and the themes that we came up with. So then after running it several times among the research team, we then identify the themes that you are seeing on the screen with a description of what it meant based on our analysis. And then we define and describe a code book that then we pass on to coders for them to analyze the rest of the kits. So this is basically the result of all the themes that came up from the probes that we use. And the last exercise that Sara is going to talk about is the spatial experience.
Yeah, so one of the last activities we included in these kits were, since we had everybody's addresses and since we had to send out the kits, we actually made a personalized map for each of these probes that showed about a 1 mile radius around each of the residences. And we asked participants, first we limited participation to those living in Boston because we wanted to see what the clusters look like. We asked students to take a 15-minute walk around the map or around where they live, and we gave them red, green, and yellow stickers. With those stickers, they were supposed to take green stickers to mark where they saw the environment thriving. They were supposed to use the yellow stickers to mark where they saw the environment threatened. And then they were supposed to use the red stickers to where they found the environment in danger of extinction. This sort of participatory mapping method also has links to Photo Voice, which is a public health method. And I think the results were pretty interesting. You can go to the next slide. I'll just overlay it with an actual aerial photo so you can kind of see where these align. So obviously, you know, there's a park near Northeastern, so we see many green stickers there. A lot of the red stickers align with major traffic thoroughfares where there's just lots of hard infrastructure. And then interesting to see where there were different perceptions, right? If you have like a red, a yellow, and a green, sometimes all clustered in one space. So that will allow us to go back and kind of, you know, read the environment for what students may have been seeing. And they wrote down observations as well. As we expand this study in the future, we see a potential too, as we have more and more geolocated stickers. Sorry, I should mention that we took the stickers, we geolocated each of them and put them in one GIS so we could see where these overlaid. And so as we expand it, we can start to see where these overlay with spatial distributions of, say, air pollution, urban heat islands, but also socioeconomic status to test the hypothesis on whether different neighborhoods experiment, how they experiment climate change more acutely than others. So to wrap it up, I would just say this time, how many minutes do we have? We believe the strengths of this approach, first of all, was a fun and engaging experience outside the online realm. We had a response rate of a little over 50%, as little stuff at the end of the semester, but we, you know, I think we engaged participants in a very engaging manner and allowed them to step away from the online world for a little bit. You can read the feedback on the right. I won't read it through, but we got a lot of positive feedback in the end. As well, you know, the materialization of this toolkit was really crucial, that instead of a workshop, the tangibility of the materials, especially the stones, I wish you could touch the stones. They're like we've been touching them as sort of stress relief through this whole experiment. But it allowed participants to connect physically with the world around us. And that's what the purpose of the mapping exercise as well. In situatedness of this experience, we tried to provide a safe space for conversation, what we would have done in a workshop, instead people could do on their own time, especially in a very fraught, difficult time that we're all living through. And then with inclusiveness, this also allowed people that may have mobility issues or other time constraints to do it on their own time. And last of all, just the user centeredness, experience design, which is why we're all here. All of these kits seem tailored to each particular participant and allowed them to allowed us to read a real quality of data, a really, really rich data set that we can pore over, that we can figure out coding mechanisms for, that's still allowed for these insights. And especially, you know, again, this whole process was really guided by risk management and safety. We had to do a complete COVID turnaround. As Steph mentioned, we planned to do this workshop 2 weeks after, originally it was scheduled for 2 weeks after our entire campus shut down. So we took some time, ran this through IRB, and it was a completely safe, hands-off research design using live participants though.
Okay. So moving forward, we have 2 projects that are in the works, which have been inspired by the Design Probe kits. The first is an online survey, and our survey is driven by, like I said, our research findings, as well as existing theories in environmental stress, something that's called climate anxiety, and also health risk behaviors. I'll get a little bit more into the theory on the next slide. But in terms of the methodology that we hope to use, this will be a slightly different approach that is based more on my expertise in quantitative research. I'm hoping to get a large, more representative sample of young adults, since our sample for this particular project was small, given the richness of the data, for it to be manageable. These young adults will receive an 11-part survey, which is populated with all close-ended questions, so we won't have to code anything, which would be nice break for Estefania. It'll be hosted on Qualtrics. All the data will be analyzed in SPSS. And we hope the implications of this particular project, that the findings will inform the design of an on-campus communication campaign that will motivate action among students, improve or increase their agency and self-efficacy, help them or direct them toward better stress and coping mechanisms. Like I said, increase empathy, reduce climate anxiety by encouraging engagement in pro-environmental behaviors, and then decrease other health risk behaviors. So the next slide is just an overview of the full theoretical model that we've pulled together, both from our research findings as well as the aforementioned literature. Our objective will be to assess these relationships between young adult climate change perceptions and their behaviors. For instance, what exactly drives climate action and problem-focused coping, including the elements we discovered that were important to our Design Probe Kit participants, such as trust in government, climate anxiety, and their personal experience with climate change in their environments. We'll also be investigating the potential links between climate anxiety and health risk behaviors like vaping as a means of self-medicating and coping with climate-induced stress. This was less apparent in our Design Probe Kit findings, but something we believe that young adults may not consciously believe are connected. For instance, their worries about climate change and maladaptive coping mechanisms such as drinking, vaping, and or smoking. Our second future project in the works is a deliberative forum, which is a democratic process engaging citizens in small group education and discussion. We begin with a population sample. They're given an initial survey. They receive some background information about the connections between climate change, self-efficacy, climate action, coping. They'll engage in small group discussion. There'll be some expert Q&A, more close small group discussion, and an exit survey. The goal is to recruit participants from Northeastern and possibly some neighboring community colleges to get a more diverse sample. Because of the expertise that's within our group here, the goal is also to embed some co-creative workshops within the forum that consist of the mapping exercises or some evocative objects that they can use to facilitate the small group discussions. And the scale and time frame of this particular project will be contingent on our securing external funding this year. So this was a lot. To put it in sum, we've discovered that young adult climate change attitudes are complex, which is consistent with prior research in this area. Specifically, we found they're very concerned about climate change. They lack trust in institutions and government. However, they're motivated to act. Many of the students that responded felt privileged and concerned for those at high risk. So climate justice was also a really important factor that we looked to explore further. But they're unsure what to do and how to cope with the anxiety and the pressure that's being felt. We're proud to have leveraged a new set of design-based research methods as well as Northeastern's design resources to conduct this work. The tools developed can help young adults with climate anxiety, both acutely, right? They had these climate kits and were able to go outside during COVID and engage with their environment. Lots of people reported how happy it made them to go outside and to do something like this for their mental health. We surfaced some diverse range of perspectives and attitudes using these unique methods, and we envision potential for real change with the deliberative forums and the survey evidence-based messaging that we'll put forth after conducting the survey and developing the campaign. So we thank you for your time and attention and patience as we worked out the technological issues, and welcome any comments or questions you may have.
Can I ask you a question? Okay. First of all, thanks for.
We have a question here. Is that okay? Right there. Okay.
Moderator said yes.
Thank you for a very interesting research. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about the mythology. So how big was the group of people you worked with? Which part of your strategy do you think was the most novel, what worked in the most novel way from all the things that you used in this process?
The original sample size was, I think we're
One of
talking
these slides.
about 60 and
Yeah.
had about a 50% response rate,
We have
which is pretty high considering, especially given the circumstances where we sent out the kits sort of after lockdown. But I probably defer to Steph in terms of what you think the most novel methodology was.
Oh, and Sara and Michael and Miso.
To the team.
I don't know. I think one of the things that was novel is kind of a, probes are kind of this object that Gaber created really to surface creative responses. But we also, with the social science influence that we have on this team, we were able to also look through these both for the creative responses, but also look at them from a social science perspective and treat those probes with like coding approaches, grounded theory, that developed this kind of a more holistic perspective of what the entire population was giving back. So I never really thought to use probes in that way before until our social science expert.
So this is an arranged or forced marriage between scholars across different departments. We're very interdisciplinary and all have different levels of expertise when it comes to quantitative or qualitative methodologies and backgrounds. So it's been wonderful to be able to collaborate with this.
Thanks.
Thank you.